This is Join Us in France, episode 298. 298. Oh, that's a lot of episodes. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and today I bring you a conversation with Elise on the Bois de Boulogne near Paris. Now, you may have heard about it because it's famous for having prostitutes, but that's only in one part of the park, and for most of us, that's the least interesting part, I suspect. There's a lot about this large wooded area to the west of Paris that makes it intriguing and lovely. So let's talk about why you might want to take a stroll in the Bois de Boulogne next time you're in Paris. Thank you, patrons, for giving me a precious gift, the time to produce this podcast. Your monthly gift makes it all possible, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that. A shout out to new patrons and more info on how to join all my wonderful patrons after the interview. Show notes for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/298, where you can see a recap of what Elise and I discussed. Follow Addicted to France on Instagram to see the photos of the Bois de Boulogne. I'll post them this week. And I'll send out a new newsletter in this coming week with a new recipe, new French recipe, of course. If you'd like to subscribe, go to joinusinfrance.com and look for the green button that says extras. And if you are subscribed but didn't see the last one a few days ago in your inbox, search for it, because sometimes newsletters get thrown out for reasons that really elude me. Bonjour Elise.
Bonjour Annie.
We are off to the Bois de Boulogne.
Oh, yeah. We are off to the Bois de Boulogne.
To Grandma's house we go.
Yes, to Grandma's house we go. The Bois de Boulogne. It's very strange because in Paris, those of you out there who have, of course, already been, you know there are a bunch of little pocket parks, but the two big green spaces are at the extreme est and the extreme east and extreme west of the city, and that is on the east side we have the Bois de Vincennes, which of course surrounds the old fortified castle of Vincennes, and on the west side is the Bois de Boulogne, which somehow, at least for me, always feels much further away, I don't know why, than the Bois de Vincennes. Maybe because I usually stay a little bit closer to the east side of the city center.
Yeah, it's about the same distance.
It's about the same distance,
probably,
right?
Whatever.
But thanks. I love the fact that, Annie, that this came up as a subject to do, because it helps me learn things that I didn't know before. The Bois de Boulogne, in my mind, being a real cinephile, is connected to a movie called Les Dames de Bois de Boulogne, which is a movie actually from 1945 by a French filmmaker named Robert Bresson, which in my ignorance, I thought was about the prostitutes in the Bois de Boulogne.
Yeah, with a name like that, you would think so.
You would think so, right?
Yeah.
Because it is, in fact, it is a reality that since the Bois de Boulogne has become a place for just being a park, which is its more recent history, there is a small section of it, and I actually tried looking yesterday on Wikipedia. You're going to laugh, but I was wondering if it's marked on the Wikipedia map. This is where it is, but actually it's not. But there is a section that is known and has been known since the middle of the 19th century as being an area for this kind of activity.
Sure.
But it turns out that the movie, which I think I saw once years and years and years ago, which in my fading memory means I don't remember anything about it at all, is not about that. It's about vengeance.
Ooh.
And it's about vengeance where a woman who wants to get back at a man who has jilted her, decides to go look for a young woman who is indeed a prostitute in the Bois de Boulogne. And she pretends to make her into an upper-class lady, and then the rest of the story follows from there. So there is some connection to this
some kind of, yeah.
But so it's interesting that even for me, when you mentioned doing the Bois de Boulogne, that was the first thing I thought of.
I would have never thought of that ever. I would have never thought of that ever.
Well, it shows you where my mind goes, actually. Anyway, but as it turns out, in doing some research about the Bois de Boulogne, I found out some fascinating things. And so let's start. Maybe we should go backwards in time. The Bois de Boulogne is a park of 800 hectares, which means approximately 2,000 acres. So it's big.
It's big, yeah.
It's a fairly big park. It covers the 16th arrondissement. It's to the extreme west of the 16th arrondissement, which is a very posh area in general, and is connected to Neuilly, which is a very, very posh area on its north side. And it's basically surrounded by very nice neighborhoods. Which is interesting because that is the way it was redesigned when Baron Haussmann was given the job by Napoleon III. So we're talking about the very middle of the 19th century, of turning what was, in fact, up until that time, simply a very big forest into what we would call a park. So, like, what's the difference between a forest and a park?
I guess you have developed paths.
Yeah.
You have maybe facilities, roads that people can use.
You're going to get a good ice cream for dessert.
I mean, nowadays I would hope there's bathrooms.
Well, I'm sure that there are in different places, actually.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a priority when they actually started redesigning it.
True.
But you're absolutely right. What happened was, and I'll talk about the ancient history of it in a minute because it is fascinating just how ancient it is. But when it was redesigned by order of Napoleon III, it was to be turned into a huge area of pleasure and outing for what was at the time a very exclusive population, because it was an area of Paris that was just being developed starting in the 1850s. And so what they did was they started putting in, they put into roads, they put in paths, as you say, to walk. There are several very, very beautiful artificial lakes. There's a whole system of irrigation. And in fact, one of the problems that came up when they were trying to kind of civilize this forest was that there was too much of a difference of level for the water.
Yes.
And so they actually had to bring in,
Pumps,
engineers. There's a word for water engineers. But anyway, they had to bring in water engineers to figure out a system for pumping, because otherwise part of it was going to get flooded and part of it was not going to have any water at all.
Yeah.
And all of this was actually a major, major project of urban development in the 1850s and 1860s.
Okay.
So this is really, when we talk about things like the Opera House and all of this, this is Haussmannian, this is part of the Haussmannian redefinition, basically, overhaul of Paris. And it became very quickly a favorite place for the upper class to go. But to the great astonishment of a lot of people, especially those people who really didn't want to be mixing with the hoi polloi, it also became a place for the populace to go. And it is basically, it has stayed that way all of these years. There's a part of the Bois de Boulogne that really, some of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Paris. If you continue up the Avenue Foch, which is in the 16th arrondissement, you eventually get to one of the ancient ports of Paris. And from there, it's not very far to get to the more or less southern end of the Bois de Boulogne. You have that whole area around there, which is very, very exclusive. And then as you go further north, you get to things that are much more popular, as they would say, much more popular. So it became very, very important. And it is considered one of the two green areas, as the French would say, poumon for the city of Paris.
So the lung.
The lungs, right? This is the green area that sort of helps breathe in air. This morning I heard on the radio that because this week we're having a heat wave, Paris is super, super, super polluted today.
Right. So they have ozone alerts.
Exactly.
And then certain cars can't drive. We all have a sticker on our cars now.
We have a sticker on our cars.
That gives us a rating of pollution rating.
Exactly.
So if you have a 1 or a 2 or maybe a 3.
I don't know. I think I have a
depends.
2. I'm lucky. So.
I have a 3.
Yeah.
Because I have a big diesel car.
Right.
But usually, even when it's polluted, they let me go. But it's the 4 and above that they can't drive.
Right.
So that would be like Hummers and trucks or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So of course, the Bois de Boulogne has stayed a very important area in terms of a place for people to get to. Now, of course, you can get there by bus, you can get there by metro, you don't have to take a car. It's really easy to get there. In fact, if you go to the Monet Museum de Marmottan, which is at the end of the 16th, you're basically at the beginning of the Bois de Boulogne. You can just walk a little bit further and you get there. But what I didn't know, and this is where, I always get so excited, is the history of the Bois de Boulogne. First of all, question that I'm sure you won't be able to answer because I can't answer it either, except I know the answer now. Why is it called the Bois de Boulogne?
Je sais pas.
Well, neither did I. Okay. And I don't think anybody knows except those people who write these stupid history details and things like that. Yeah. So it happens to be, for a reason that you'd never guess in a million years, there was a king in the early 1300s named Philippe Le Bel.
I've heard of him.
Okay, he was an interesting person. He did some very nasty things, but he also did some very good things for unifying France. And he was very devout. And he took one of his daughters, named Isabel, to the small town of Boulogne-sur-Mer, which is on the Channel.
Okay.
Because she was given to Edward II of England as a wife.
I see. Okay.
And so, and Boulogne-sur-Mer was part of England for a very, very long time.
Okay.
And it was fortified at the time. It's a very, very old city. I've never actually been there, but I happen to know that. And in the city of Boulogne-sur-Mer, he and his daughter, before she was taken away across the Channel, prayed in a church that was there. And that church, let's see if I can remember the name of it. The church was called Notre Dame de Boulogne la Petite. Notre Dame de Boulogne.
Okay.
And when she left, and I don't really know if it's because he liked the church so much or because he was just sorry to see his daughter go.
Yeah.
He came back to Paris. And of course, at that time, the kings were itinerant. So they didn't stay all the time in a particular castle. But the forest on the west side of Paris was a huge hunting forest.
Yeah.
Really huge hunting forest. And he decided that he wanted to build another church, a small church, in the middle of the forest in honor of this church that he'd been to in Boulogne-sur-Mer.
Oh, okay. Why not?
And so he called that Notre Dame de Boulogne la Petite.
La Petite.
La Petite.
Okay.
Okay. And therefore, people started calling the area around the church the Bois de Boulogne.
There you go. I didn't know that at all.
Who would know such a thing? Really. I mean, really, it's the kind of thing. It's like it's so way out there.
But I'm going to guess that if there's a church, there's going to be monks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, she's good.
Well,
she's good. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to back up a minute. Okay. The history of the Bois de Boulogne, which of course is really the history of a forest, starts in the year 717. So we're talking about not only a little bit before Charlemagne. This is when the Franks have taken over what is basically the northern half of what is now France. And we have the kingdom not of the descendants of Charlemagne, who are the Carolingians, okay?
Yeah.
We have the cousins, and I've never figured out the relationship exactly, but they were also Franks, and they were definitely cousins, that are the Merovingian.
Yeah.
And the king at the time was a king named Chideric.
Chideric, yes.
Chideric. I don't know why I have a hard time saying that. Anyway, he gave the land in the middle of this enormous, enormous forest that at the time probably went much, much further west He gave it to the Abbey of Saint Denis.
Ah, okay.
So you are good when it comes to talking about abbeys and monasteries and everything. And they built a monastery in the middle of the forest.
Okay.
And that monastery was extremely important because it was run by the Abbey of Saint Denis, which was very rich and very, very important, and basically controlled zillions of monasteries all over what at the time was France, which is basically the northern part, right? Mm-hmm. And that continued. And that continued until several hundred years later, and the time of Philippe-Auguste. Now, you and I know Philippe-Auguste because he's the one who was the first one to put ramparts around a good section of Paris.
Yeah.
And that was in the 1100s. And he bought a good chunk of this forest. Now, how do you buy a forest? I don't know how you buy a forest.
Same way you buy anything else. With money.
Yeah. I know, but it was already part of the kingdom. I don't know. Anyway, it belonged to the kings, and how he managed, whether it, I don't know. I think what happened was he had to actually give money to the Abbey of Saint Denis.
I see.
To get them to give him a big chunk of
the forest.
Of this forest. Because what he wanted, he was not religious at all. Huh? He wanted a hunting ground. Mm-hmm. So he took what basically is about half, so the 800 hectare that exists now is pretty much the part he bought.
Okay.
It was a little bit bigger at the time.
Okay.
And he paid the Abbey of Saint Denis basically to have the monks do something else, so that he could turn it into a very, very large, huge hunting ground for him and his court. Mm-hmm. And in 1256, so this is a little bit later, St. Louis IX's sister, his youngest sister, her name was also Isabel, she decided that she did not want to get married. Louis IX, this is the Louis that did the Sainte-Chapelle and that went on a crusade to Jerusalem, and his family was all very, very, very devout.
Right.
He had lots of brothers and sisters, and Isabel was his youngest and apparently his favorite sibling. Mm. And she made an announcement when she was in her teens that she would not get married. She wanted to be a devout nun.
Okay.
So Louis IX, he decided that he would give her a chunk of land in the middle of this forest, which was still, of course, just a royal forest, so that she could have a monastery. They called it a monastery, even if it was for women. It's very confusing to me sometimes, but in fact, it's considered to be a monastery. And it became the monastery of Longchamp.
Longchamp.
The name should mean something to you.
The bags.
I didn't think about that.
Also the hypodrome.
Yep. Indeed. So where the hippodrome is exactly where the monastery was that was built for Isabel, who was the sister of the King of France.
Okay.
Okay. So that was in the 13th century. And she became the head abbot. I guess you could say abbess. Yeah.
Abbess.
Of the, and she lived there for the rest of her life. Mm-hmm. And it became a very, very important monastery. And the land around it was connected to the church. So again, you're absolutely right. And that's
kind of sad that at the time you either had to get married or become a nun.
Yeah. Well, especially
it kind of limits your choices, doesn't it?
I think if you were poor, it was different. But if you were rich, you were a piece of merchandise. And if you were royal, you were even more a piece of merchandise. So if you were royal, you had to be either religious or they would trade you to a king, a prince, a duke, or somebody like that, because that's what you were there for.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this is little by little what happens with this big, big forest that, of course, originally was just wild and filled with wolves and all kinds of things. And it became a site of a religious pilgrimage, which is really interesting because I would never have thought of that, especially knowing what the Bois de Boulogne is today.
Well, but Saint Louis had so many relics.
Yes.
Because it's not just the one that he brought to the Sainte-Chapelle.
No.
He collected relics. And so he had so many, he probably gave one to his sister.
I'm sure he did.
Yeah.
I'm sure he did. So basically what we have here is that it went from being just kind of wild territory to being a hunting ground, then to having, still being a good chunk of forest, but with this monastery with land in the middle of it. And then we get to the Renaissance period with Francois I, one of my favorite kings, because of his love of everything Renaissance.
That was a big jump, by the way.
We're coming into the early 1500s.
Right.
In the middle of, before that, in the famous war, 100 Years' War, which is basically an exaggeration, but the war between the English and the French.
Yeah.
The English,
Joan of Arc.
Joan of Arc and all those other, crazy people.
Yeah. Azincourt.
They used the forest, and the English invaded the forest and attacked Paris from the forest. Yeah, there we go. It's like they came through down from Boulogne-sur-Mer, and all of that, and they came through and they hung out, they hid in the forest, and they attacked. And there was a lot of stuff like that going on for about all through the 1400s. And then we get to Francois, who is, of course, basically king in the early 1500s. And being that he is the king who likes everything very classy, and he's a builder, basically. He likes to make war, but he also likes to build things. He decides that besides having the monastery in the middle of this woods, and besides it being a hunting ground, he's going to make a chateau.
I see.
And so this is the beginning of the period where it changes a little bit, because he builds a chateau called the Chateau de Madrid.
Oh?
Nobody knows why.
Yeah.
I looked up a little bit. Maybe I didn't do enough research, but nobody really knows why, and nobody knows it's because he copied something. He'd never been to Madrid. His cousin, who was the Spanish king, he made him prisoner in Italy, so it couldn't have been that. But he built a chateau in the middle of the forest that was, and this is where we get a little bit closer to modern times. Francois I was a very, very interesting king. He did lots of incredible things in terms of building, but he was also a ladies' man. And so the Chateau de Madrid, besides just being one of his many chateaux, because he did Fontainebleau, and it was a place where he received, or that's of course what you would say in French. It's a place where he had some of the courtesans and some of the ladies that he liked come
visit him,
which is kind of where they think the beginning of this whole thing started, with the Bois de Boulogne.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, you never know.
Yep. He made it cool. Yeah. This was like the place to go in the forest, right? Yeah.
So we're going to skip a bunch of time after that, and then we get to, interestingly enough, the Revolution. The revolutionaries hid in the forest.
Okay.
They destroyed the Chateau de Madrid.
Right, because I don't think it's there.
No, there's nothing left.
Okay.
In 1792, they destroyed the entire chateau. But it's interesting that they actually really used the forest as a place to hide from the royal troops. And what's really amazing to know is that a few years later, at the time of Napoleon, when Napoleon came back, not the first time, but the second time, and he had Spain and England and all these countries fighting against him, they managed to also invade the forest to attack Napoleon's troops. I'm not sure how, but it very clearly says that the English and the Spanish managed to actually use the Bois de Boulogne in order to... Oh, and the Russians as well. How'd they get there? I don't know. That's weird, huh?
Yeah,
How did the Russians? That doesn't seem right. But anyway, that's what it says. I don't know. I may be wrong. Okay. And then what happens is, so we're already in the beginning of the 19th century.
Yeah.
Half the forest was burned between the fighting of the revolution and the fighting between Napoleon and all these other countries. And basically, this was a place that had really been important in terms of a section of land that was used both for the wood, for the monastery. It had a certain historical importance. And so it is because of that when Napoleon III comes to power, he decides to rebuild the Bois de Boulogne. By rebuilding it means planting hundreds of thousands of new trees. So the oldest trees that are there now are actually from the middle of, well, I mean, I'm sure there are a few that are older. But basically, what we see now when we go to the Bois de Boulogne is started in the middle of the 19th century. And it was this new modern concept of taking an area that had a lot of history connected to battles and a lot of very strange things happening with a lot of upheaval, that Napoleon III and Haussmann decided to turn into an area for pleasure. And so what we have today is 800 hectare with all of this beautiful landscaping and artificial lakes and the roads. And
So it's not just woods now.
no,
There's much more than that.
no, there's much more. There are trails if you want to go horseback riding. You can go rowing on the lakes. And they also created inns for people to stay in, but also a couple of very important restaurants. And in fact, one of the most famous 3-star Michelin restaurants is in the Bois de Boulogne, and that is called Le Pré Catalan.
Ah, yes, I've heard of that.
And I went online yesterday to see how much it would cost to eat there, just to get an idea.
Yeah.
Well, we could get away, Annie, you and I, with having lunch
Yeah.
for 170 euros.
Wow, that's expensive.
Okay. And if I remember correctly, that does not include the wine.
Right. Well, I normally don't have wine at lunch.
But it is.
Does it include a Diet Pepsi?
Probably not. They would probably tell you to go somewhere else. Probably go to Burger King or something like that.
Well, I need my Diet Pepsi at lunchtime.
However, the Bois de Boulogne, so this is what has happened to it. The monastery of Longchamp that was created for St. Louis' sister was, of course, destroyed also during the French Revolution. Mm-hmm. And it is now exactly where the hippodrome of Longchamp is.
Okay.
And there's a second hippodrome.
So hippodrome, is that the same? Is it the same word in English? Hippodrome?
Yeah.
It's a horse.
It's a horse track, racetrack.
A racetrack.
Basically a racetrack. But I went online to make sure because you have trotters, you have different kinds of different
races.
Horse races.
Yeah.
So there are 2 hippodromes in the Bois de Boulogne.
Okay.
There's the hippodrome of Longchamp, and which is trotters, as far as I understand. And then there's the hippodrome of Auteuil, which is also on the site of the ruins of what was the Chateau de Madrid.
Okay.
And that is steeplechase.
What chase?
Steeplechase, that's when you jump, you do jumps
okay.
and stuff like that, you know. So it's famous for having both of these.
Steeple, like a steeple on a church?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
called the steeple.
I didn't know
you
that.
don't know that
no,
word.
I didn't know that. No.
Steeplechase, so they have all these jumps and things. It's kind of like slaloming if you're skiing, you know. I mean, that kind of,
Well, there's human races with things that they have to jump too.
Right,
so,
exactly.
You know, yeah.
And so you have both of the hippodrome inside the park, and then you have 3 very fancy restaurants: the Pré Catalan, and then the Auberge de Bonheur, and the Chalet des Îles, which is right next to one of the lakes. And it is a place that has been used as a reference. Here we go.
Here comes the
cat. She's waited this long. I'm almost done, Ananas. Okay, you can just hang in there a little bit. What's really amazing and fascinating too is that I'm going to read off the names of a bunch of French writers. This is 19th century that have used the Bois de Boulogne as a character in their stories or their books because it's got so much history and it's so interesting. So you have Balzac.
Yes.
Flaubert.
Do you know in which book by any chance?
In Balzac, it's La Comédie Humaine.
La Comédie Humaine, okay.
The others, I didn't write down the works.
Okay.
So we have Balzac, Flaubert, Zola, de Maupassant, Daudet.
Yeah. I've read all of them.
You've read all of them, right?
Well, some of them.
And then there were 2
books.
or 3 other writers, honestly, I'd never heard of before, so I didn't include them.
Okay.
But one of the things that they were saying is that it was really an inspiration, and it was also an inspiration for the Impressionist painters, who very often went along the Seine or went to the Bois de Boulogne, to one of the lakes, because
that would make a nice bucolic scene.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or a clearing, but it would be hard to paint that.
Right. Well, but of course, people like
to paint
Renoir
anything.
and all of those, they painted people sitting next to or listening to music because they had a couple of guinguettes, these outdoor places that had some food and drinking and music and things like that. And so basically what happened was that after Napoleon III and Haussmann reinvented the Bois de Boulogne, it became the favorite place for Parisians to go.
Right, because it'd be nice to get out of the city, and it's cooler.
It's cooler
than the city, and you can walk around, ride your bicycles, do.
And there's lots of different places. I mean, it's really it's fairly big, and it's got lots of twists and turns. And because it was built in what they call English style, it means that it wasn't very manicured, so it looks a little bit like wild nature, even though it's not, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which is really a way for people who are in the city to get a sense of being in nature.
So are there any architectural interesting things like in the Parc Monceau? You have the colonnade and the pyramid and whatever. They didn't put stuff like that.
No, I mean. The only things that are of great interest is that occasionally, if you walk, the last time when I was there were just these when you go to one or two of the artificial lakes, you have these fun little structures that are like in Parc Monceau. Oh, that was the other thing. It's like the person who helped design all of this is the same one who did Montsouris, Monceau, and Vincennes. So basically, the same park architect was used to conceive of what to do in all of these parks. This is just a different scale from Monceau or Montsouris.
Right, it's much bigger. Yeah.
But you have these fake little structures or these funny little fake little waterfalls in a few of these places. The parks, I just remember we went to the southern end. We were actually trying to get to the northern end to go to the Fondation Vuitton, which we'll talk about on another podcast.
Right, we'll do another episode on Vuitton and the Jardin d'Acclimatation.
And we had a car, so we parked and walked around down there. And it's really fun, and there were lots of ducks in the lake, and there's these little side paths that you can take, and people could actually fish in a couple of the lakes. It's just very pleasant, and it's just it's kind of like all of a sudden you leave the city and you're
in nature.
You're in nature.
Yeah. And also, it's a great habitat for birds.
It's a great habitat for birds.
Birds need trees. They need forests. And especially close to a big city like this, if there's ever going to be major birds coming back to Paris, they would have to have a place to nest and all that. So, yeah.
And then, of course, you have Roland Garros, which is at one end of it.
Ah, yeah, Roland Garros is the tennis complex.
The huge tennis complex. But I think, and other than that, you have the little, what's called Le Carré, which is where the prostitutes are.
Ah, Le Carré.
And as I said at the beginning, I have no idea where it is exactly in the park. But it is actually...
Well, I'm going to surprise. It's going to be shocking to you, but I've never been either to the Carré.
I have no... but it's interesting that it's really well known.
Well,
and it's been well known since the time of Toulouse-Lautrec and people like that. You see, I mean, it's really part of the mystique of the Bois de Boulogne.
Right. And I'm sure there's Poirot books that have Hercule Poirot stories that have to do with the Bois de Boulogne as well.
I would bet. I wonder if there's a Simenon one, in fact, too.
Probably.
Probably.
Yeah.
So the Bois de Boulogne is really Paris.
It's the woods, but in Paris.
It's the woods, but in Paris. And if you need to get there, you can get the metro, metro and bus. It depends on which part of the park you want to go to.
Is it Line 1 that goes all the way there?
Line 1 goes all the way to the beginning, but then it depends on where you want to go because it's a big park, but it's longer north-south than it's wider east-west. So it depends on whether you want to go to the northern end, which is where the Parc d'Acclimatation and the Fondation Vuitton are, which is really where Neuilly begins, or whether you want to go to the southern part. So it depends.
It looks like line 9 also goes there, line 2, line 10, the tram, line 2.
Right.
There's buses, 241 and 244.
There's also a huge rose garden. There's a roseraie.
Which is probably worth seeing because roses are pretty easy to grow in France.
Yeah.
If you can keep the bugs away from them, which is hard to do now because we can't use any more pesticides.
Right.
So,
but I know that it's famous. I have to admit that I've never visited myself.
Yeah, I've never been to that roseraie either.
But I know I have friends who have and who are very much into flowers and roses and said it was absolutely gorgeous.
I think if I lived in a city like Paris, it would be part of my sanity to be able to escape to a place like this and just breathe in the fresh air and just be around trees and hear the birds and stuff like that. Because life, it's not that there are no birds in the big city, but the fresh air is not usually an option.
No.
I mean, during the confinement, things cleaned up a lot. The air cleaned up a lot. You could hear yourself think in Paris. But otherwise, Paris is very noisy as a city.
It's very noisy.
Yeah. And so, like all big cities, I mean, it's not so specific to Paris. But it would be so important for me to get away to that sort of place for a nice, good walk or whatever.
And it's also...
Does it have opening and closing times or no?
It's not a closed-in park. No, it's really a big. It's the thing is too is that because it's surrounded by really wealthy areas, it's a little less noisy and polluted even as a park than the Bois de Vincennes.
Right, because Vincennes is more more popular,
developed,
developed popular apartment buildings, things like that. Yeah,
and so you have almost more of a sense of space in spite of everything else, because you don't immediately have big structures surrounding it or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it is really very lovely.
Yeah, I think for people who've been to Paris many times, or maybe you're staying a while, it would really be interesting to take an outing to the Bois de Boulogne.
And then if you are so inclined and have the budget, I mean, you could always try the Prix Catalan. I don't know.
Right. And also, it's totally free. That's the kind of activities you can do in Paris for free.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can go to the park.
Yep, enjoy the park for free. Merci, Elise.
Oh, thank you so much, Annie.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Again, I want to thank my patrons for supporting the show and giving back. Patrons get several exclusive rewards for doing so. You can see them at patreon.com/join us. And there's some that are not even listed, like the video on driving roundabouts in France that I posted this week. Thank you to all of you for supporting the show. Some of you have done so for many years. You are amazing. And a shout out this week to new patrons, Stacy, Elizabeth Henry, and Dana Martin. Thank you so much for becoming patrons and making this podcast possible. And Elizabeth wrote, I have been meaning to sign up for this for at least a year. Better late than never. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I appreciate you doing this, even if it, there's podcasters I've thought about supporting for a long time, and sometimes I do it right away and sometimes I don't. So I understand. And thank you also to Stephanie from Montreal, beautiful city, for your lovely message when you bought all of my voice map tours this week. Stephanie said, thank you, Annie. I'd like you to know that I've been following your podcast for a year now, and it has helped me through a difficult time. My recently departed husband and I both enjoyed listening to your podcast together. It sure beats CNN in the background. We were planning on taking the Paris and Toulouse tours together. My possible trip won't be until November, maybe later, Stephanie, I'm afraid. And you do say maybe November at the earliest, but it doesn't hurt to make a purchase a sure thing early. Merci beaucoup, Stephanie. I'm so sorry to hear about your husband's passing, Stephanie. And yes, this is a difficult time for you, and I'm glad that the podcast makes it somewhat. It's not easier. It's, I guess, more normal. What are you gonna do? And without much of a transition, I also want to say thank you to the people who use the Amazon affiliate link. Also, that pays for the various bills that show up in my inbox every month to keep this podcast running. I appreciate those of you who do that very much also. And for my personal update this week, well, it finally rained a little bit in Toulouse. Paris and Bordeaux got a lot more rain than we did, but we got enough to cool things off. Temperatures will head back up, because it's summer. I mean, it's August. But no more canicule events in the near forecast. I love it when it's around 80, 85 degrees because that's really when I like to hang out outside, do some yard work, and be outside as much as possible. I got a funny photo from my friend Patricia today. She got drenched. She was outside in Paris. She's a runner. And she got totally drenched. It rained a lot in Paris this week, yeah. So last week I told you about the dog I'm taking care of temporarily. He caused some commotion for us because he's also a runner. Not the same kind of runner. He won't jump the fence, which he probably could. It's not that high. It's like 4 feet high or something. But he will take off if the gate stays open. At my house, like most French houses, it's fully fenced and we have an electric gate. I installed that gate like 10 years ago and it works great, but sometimes I don't know why it doesn't close like it's supposed to. It's supposed to stay open. You push the button, it opens for 120 seconds and then it closes, right? But by the time the 120 seconds have passed, you've driven off or walked off and you don't notice that the stupid gate doesn't close. And it doesn't happen very often, maybe once a month or something. It's not a problem because my dogs, they don't go anywhere. The gate could be wide open all day. They don't they don't care. We live on a quiet little chemin, once in a while I see that it's open and I close it again and I forget about it. And I don't see the need to change the gate just because it fails to close once in a great while. Anyway, but Swiffer, this dog, he never misses an opportunity to run, right? I actually saw him take off out of the corner of my eye. I called him. He turned his head, briefly looked at me, and then he took off at full speed. So, I saw him run right at the end of the path. So I knew he was heading towards the bakery. And then after that, who knows? So I put my own dogs in the house. I grabbed a leash and I went looking for the escape artist. But most people can't catch up with a dog running at full speed, and I certainly cannot. So, because I knew that he was a runner because he's run off before. That's why I ordered him a collar with a medallion with his name and my phone number on it. And all my dogs have that because I figure it's the least I can do. To me, it's ridiculous the number of people who don't do that. They don't have a dog collar or dog tag. Well, do they not want to find their dogs? Should it run off or something happen? I don't know. I mean, dogs have microchips and maybe people think, the microchip is enough. But it's not, because by the time they find a microchip reader, it's been hours, maybe days, Dog tags are much faster, much easier. Anyway, when a dog runs off like that, of course, there's always the risk of getting hit by a car. But I live in a village, and he took off around 8 p.m. when the traffic was really low. So I figured someone would call me, and that's exactly what happened. Within, 10 minutes, actually. I went and got him and realized that the man who grabbed him is someone I know. He loves dogs. He walks his own spaniel every day. So I've seen him around for years, and we've talked a few times, It's not like we're friends or anything, but, somebody you see every day, you say hello to every day, and you talk to occasionally, you feel like you know them. But I hadn't seen him since March. After the lockdown ended on the 11th of May, he never came back to the same walking path, which was surprising because for me, I couldn't wait for that thing to open again. And he told me why. He said he's worried because now that they've resurfaced it, he says it's too nice. There's too many people on it. And he's worried, about catching COVID-19. But I told him that it's been really easy for me to stay 2 or 3 meters away from other people. I mean, sometimes on the weekend, like this morning, there was a big group walking together and maybe I was a meter away from them, but it didn't last very long. Like for maybe 2 minutes, I was close to these people and then you move on. And it's outside anyway. So But, he said, I have diabetes and so I'm worried. And I said, yeah, I know. That's why we don't go anywhere, because we're worried about, this damn thing. So, but I was really happy to see him, because at this point, any human interactions are lovely. We have so few of them. And I am very grateful that he saw a lost dog and did something about it. So kudos to him and to whoever, if you do that too, thank you. But it's a fact that some dogs are runners, they don't mean anything by it. They just have this genetic drive to run. And sadly for Swiffer, this drive that he has is exactly why I cannot give him much freedom. When we walk, he's on a 5-meter retractable leash that's tied around my waist so he can't, yank it out of my hand. And I'm training him to stop running before he gets to the end, because this is a dog who likes to just run at full speed, and then when he gets to the end, he gets yanked on his neck and he actually yelps. It hurts. Of course it hurts. Duh. So now I just go up, 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 up. And and then he's figured it out that right when I say that, if he doesn't stop, he's going to get yanked. And so he's learning to avoid it. His owner had him on a harness to avoid this exact problem, but I don't think harnesses are the answer. He needs to learn not to yank so hard to the end of his leash, right? He just needs to not pull eventually. He'll get there. He'll get there, I hope, eventually. And of course, I can let my own 2 dogs run free in the countryside, because I know they come back when I call them. So once in a while, they're not perfect at it. Obviously, no dog is perfect at it, not even guide dogs. But once in a while, like Opie will see a wild rabbit run across the path and she takes off. And it sometimes takes her 2-3 minutes to come back. But eventually, rabbits always lose her. So yeah, she's never caught one, thank goodness. And she comes back eventually. So yeah, so dogs. I'll keep you updated on Swiffer and how he's getting along. My friend, who is the reason why I had to take him to begin with, she had to be hospitalized for a couple of days because she had an infection. And an infection in the middle of chemotherapy is not good. But she's better and she's home again. So, dang, chemotherapy, you don't want that. You really, awful. Well, if you need it, you need it. But so all this week, as I've been walking, I've been wondering why people share things on social media. Most of us, we see a lot of things on social media if we spend any time there, be it, the ones that are made for sharing are Facebook and Twitter, right? So why do we share when we do? Like, why do we do that with some things and not with others? And I think that a lot of the time it's based on emotional response, right? So something is outrageous, so I want to warn my friends against it or tell them about it or something. And this happens a lot with, unfortunately, animal abuse videos. For a while there, I was getting served all of these awful, awful videos of animal abuse because my friends thought, well, this is so awful, you have to know about it. The trouble is, when something is outrageous and it gets shared a lot, it creates an incentive for people to create more of these sorts of videos because, let's face it, humans are horrible, Yeah, some humans are just horrible people. And it also, the same thing happens with outrageous comments by politicians, and there's an election this year in America, and it's going to get out of control. And the more outrageous the title is, or the video is, or whatever it is, the more people will share it. And it's like people think, oh, how can this politician said such stupid things? And, so they share it and they criticize it. And of course, by sharing it, they give it more voice. And this is also true with the anti-mask folks. We think, oh, they're crazy and stupid. Let me show you how crazy and stupid they are. Well, maybe ignoring them would be better, wouldn't it? I honestly, personally, I think that many of these videos are a complete setup people want attention, so they'll make a video that they know will get shared widely. And if it's outrageous, it will get shared because we're stupid as humans. And I'm saying that because this week I went to a grocery store where I normally don't go. They were running ads on a special that I wanted to check out, so I went. The special was a dud. I didn't spend very much time there at all. But there was along, like 2-3 meters away from me, there was one guy who was also checking out the specials who was in the store without a mask, which is specifically prohibited, and there are signs about that everywhere. A store employee came up to him and told him that masks are mandatory. And the guy, his reaction was priceless. He pulled his mask from his pocket and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. I'm sorry, je suis désolé," whatever. He was very meek. He put it on and just, wanted to disappear. I don't think he forgot. I think he just doesn't like masks and wanted to see if he could get away with it. But whatever. I don't need to know that. But this is the first time. This is not the first time I've seen people without a mask in a store since the beginning of this mandate. But this is the first time I've seen anybody challenge anyone. And it didn't go anything like the videos you see on social media. Like, nobody got mad. Nobody got pushed around. No screaming, no yelling. It was like... And of course, I didn't pull out my phone because it didn't even cross my mind to videotape this. It was so fast and so Monsieur, faut mettre le masque, c'est obligatoire. Oh, pardon, j'ai oublié. Excusez-moi. The end. It was really simple. I think it's a fact that social media is really, really good at displaying things, serving things to us specifically that rattle our cage, right? People who poke the bear get a lot of attention, and since social media tracks our every move online, they know what we've responded to in the past, and so they show us what they think we will respond to now. So, the articles that are well-written, well-researched, articles that stay away from outrageous claims, they don't get the time of day on social media. They get a few shares, but nothing big. I mean, it's the same with podcast episodes. I produce perfectly interesting podcast episodes that get shared a few dozen times. Now, if I did something about, I don't know, something really outrageous, secret rituals in a cave in the Pyrenees, or I don't know, whatever. It would get shared a lot more. I know this, but I don't want to do it. And, it would be pretty easy to do. Like, you take some fuzzy photos or a video of people running, screaming in the woods or whatever, some disturbing audio, whatever. Come on, it's easy to do. And people, unfortunately, are getting a rise out of this. And I think we need to be aware of that and maybe resist sharing all these outrageous things because we're not going to convince anybody, and it's just, it just promotes a toxic environment, I think. That's not pleasant. And so anyway, that's it. That's all I wanted to say. I'm off of my soapbox for now. Oh, and I also have to tell you about something new we did. Actually, my husband mostly did this one. We have a new collaboration with a company called redbubble.com, and they do merchandise. But I've had merchandise before for the podcast, but it wasn't near as good as this. So they offer mugs and shirts and things like that, of course. But they also have a clock. So it says, what time is it? Time to plan another trip to France. There's an apron that's really fun. There's a face mask that says, if you can read this, you're too close. And I'll have to tell you all about the Join Us in France Travel podcast. Anyway, it's very funny. There's phone cases. There's a big, very classy looking scarf that I really like, a tote bag, of course, coffee mugs, shirts, yeah, all sorts of things. Anyway, check it out. It's joinusinfrance.com/merch, MERCH. I learned the name. I didn't know it before. It's a new word for me, merch. If you enjoy the show, introduce a friend to the podcast and show them how to listen. Next week I will bring you an episode about, this one is going to be good. It's 5 favorite chateaus in the Loire Valley with a fantastic photographer. The photos he sent me, I'm still drooling about them. And he used the camera body that I want, but not yet. Send questions or feedback to Annie@joinusinfrance.com. Thank you so much for listening. I know your listening time is precious, and I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. Have a great week. Hopefully, you're planning a trip to France, even though maybe you're not quite ready, but I'll talk to you next week. Au revoir. Bonjour, Elise.
Bonjour, Annie.
How's your Patreon going?
My Patreon is going okay. I did take a break. I was up in Brittany on vacation for a couple of weeks, and with the extreme heat and various family things, we've taken a bit of a long pause. So
of course, it's August.
It's August. Yeah, that does happen here. I guess it must be set into the brain. In August, everything kind of slows down.
The French reptilian brain kicks in.
Exactly, the French reptilian brain. So we're gonna boot it up again.
Yeah.
We're gonna start.
So people who want to support you on Patreon need to go to patreon.com/Elise Art.
Yeah.
ELYSART.
Right.
I wanted to put an E in there. No. ELYSART.
Yes.
That's it.
And I did have one new patron.
But you can't remember the name right now?
Well, I know that I don't remember if I thanked Molly, and then if it wasn't Molly, that was the most recent one. It was. I'll have to go back and get the name. But anyway, thank you, Molly, because I know you did sign up.
And thank you to everybody who supports both me and Elise, because it's very much appreciated.
Much, much, much appreciated for both of us. Yes.
The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2020 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.